Hello everyone, it's 7 o'clock, you're watching Sky News Breakfast. Now, we knew it wouldn't be good, but the autumn statement signals a drop in household income of 7%, wiping out 8 years of growth, and leaves the front pages describing the government's economic plan as pain, misery and carnage. Well, the Chancellor insists his package will make the recession shallower and shorter, and Jeremy Hunt joins me in the next few minutes. Later on, I'll also speak to Labour's Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves and the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Daisy Cooper. It's Friday, the 18th of November. A collapse in living standards, higher taxes and cuts to public spending. The Chancellor is under fire for a budget which spares no one. Inflation and growing demand are set to wipe out nearly all of the new NHS funding announced by the Chancellor, according to new analysis shared exclusively with Sky News.
World leaders convene an emergency meeting after North Korea fires a suspected intercontinental ballistic missile, capable in theory of hitting the US mainland.
The Biden administration rules that Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has immunity in a lawsuit over the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Twitter closes its offices as scores of employees start leaving the company following an ultimatum from new owner Elon Musk. Poland puts on a show of force. 2 fighter jets accompany the country's football team on their way to the World Cup in Qatar after this week's missile strike. Also ahead this morning, I'm going to be speaking to the Paralympic gold medalist undertaking a record-breaking journey to the South Pole. Hello, a very good morning to you. Now, Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, is facing criticism for his autumn statement, which will push the UK's tax burden to its highest level since the Second World War. Mr Hunt announced a package of tax rises and spending cuts to try to fill the black hole in public finances. Now, this comes as experts warn of a record fall in living standards across the country. So, here are some of the key announcements that he made. The Office for Budget Responsibility said that the size of Britain's economy, its GDP, is likely to shrink by 1.4% next year. Inflation is expected to average 9.1% this year, with unemployment likely to go up to nearly 5% by 2024. Now, household budgets are expected to fall by an average of 7.1% over the next 2 years. Now, that's the biggest drop ever recorded. The top rate of income tax will come down from £150,000 to just over £125,000, and other income tax bans and personal allowances will be frozen until 2028, capturing millions in higher rates. Average energy bills will be capped at £3,000 from next April. That's £500 higher than before. And the windfall tax on energy firms' profits will go up from 25% to 35%. Now, there's help for those most in need. The state pension, means-tested and disability benefits rise by 10.1% in line with inflation. And the NHS budget will increase slightly by £3.3 billion per year for the next 2 years. And schools will get an extra £2.3 billion a year. So plenty to talk about with the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, who joins me now. Jeremy Hunt, very good morning to you. Thanks so much for talking to us here on Sky News this morning. So Britain faces its biggest hit to living standards on record, wiping out 8 years of improvements. The economy is already in recession, and now people are facing a huge rise in the tax burden. You've been in power for 12 years. It's a pretty bleak legacy from the Conservatives, isn't it?
Well, what we have is a very challenging international situation. The drop in growth in Germany, for example, is even higher than here. Countries all over the world are dealing with the inflation shock caused by the Ukraine crisis. And what we have to do as a government is to say, what is the big thing that we can do to help families, to help businesses the most? And what people are worried about is the rise in the cost of living. That weekly shop going up, their mortgage rates going up, their energy bills going up. And this is a plan which, when you cut through the difficult decisions that I announced yesterday, It brings inflation right down. You start to see growth going right up. And you start to see our economy getting back onto an even keel. And that's the most important thing as a Conservative. I know sometimes you have to take difficult decisions. But if in the end that means more stability for families and we're protecting the NHS and schools, as you said, then we know we're doing the right thing for the long term. And that's what we do in these kinds of situations.
Well, you say that it's a challenging international situation. You're blaming global factors, and undoubtedly the pandemic and the war in Ukraine have had an impact. But don't the Conservatives need to take some responsibility as well? I mean, a lot of what you're doing is about undoing the mess that the mini-budget made and also taking steps to try to convince the markets that you're trustworthy.
Well, we reversed those measures in the mini-budget in 3 weeks. So I think we acted very quickly. We've been completely open. Yes, there were some mistakes. But when you look at America, that's increased taxes by $800 billion, you look at Germany and France that are now saying they're going to reduce their borrowing and introduce much stricter rules. You look at what Putin is doing in Ukraine. This is an international situation coming straight after a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic. So
but
these are very serious issues.
Sorry to interrupt, Jeremy Hunt, but we have the lowest growth in the G7. Why is that?
Well, that's not true. We actually have the highest growth in the G7 this year. And if you look at the last 12 years, we've actually had the third highest growth in the G7, despite a lot of global turbulence. Now, over the next 2 years, it is going to be challenging. But I think people want a government that is taking difficult decisions, has a plan that will bring down inflation, stop those big rises in the cost of the energy bills and the weekly shop, and at the same time is taking measures to help people get through this difficult period. The support for energy bills will mean that the average house will have £500 less to pay in their energy bills. We've increased the national living wage, which will mean an extra £1,600 in the pay packets of people who work full-time, and indeed protecting the triple lot for pensioners. So we're doing absolutely everything we can to help people whilst tackling this very, very challenging international situation.
But you're part of the same government that said we were going to see the biggest tax cuts in 50 years, £45 billion worth just 8 weeks ago. Now you're announcing huge tax rises and spending cuts as well, worth a total of £55 billion. What's the public supposed to make of this total reversal in direction in just a short space of time? What does it do to the Conservative Party's credibility?
Well, we've been honest with people that there were some mistakes made, but we're also saying there are much bigger issues to solve than what happened in the mini-budget. We've got a big challenge because of the costs of COVID, the costs of the war in Ukraine, and what we announced yesterday was a long-term plan to see us through to the other side. And I think people want a government that is prepared to take difficult decisions, to right the economy, to protect jobs. Yesterday, the Office for Budget Responsibility said the measures I announced will save 70,000 jobs. They'll reduce the severity of the recession by about a third. So that is a government that is doing everything it can to help families get through what is a very, very challenging period.
Well, you say help families through a challenging period, but disposable income is going to fall by more than 7% over the next 2 years. That's the biggest fall on record. We're all going to be a lot worse off, aren't we?
Well, that's what happens when you have high inflation. And that's what happens when Putin is able to blackmail us and countries all over the world by forcing a big rise in international gas prices. And that's why one of the things we announced yesterday was a new nuclear power plant, the first state-backed nuclear power plant for 30 years, to try and stop people like Putin being able to do that blackmail, which is so damaging to our living standards. I think it's important, Anna, to recognise, as a country, we've had bigger challenges before, and we've always thrived and prospered because people have been able to, or been willing to take tough, difficult decisions when they're called for. Because people know in their hearts there are big, big issues that we have to resolve, and they want a government that's prepared to take those decisions.
But People will also ask how they're going to pay their bills. I mean, we're facing the worst 2 years in modern history for household incomes. Millions are going to be dragged into higher tax bands. Council tax is likely to go up. Energy bills up again in the spring, and they're already eye-wateringly high. The Resolution Foundation says the typical annual tax bill will rise by £1,700. How are people going to afford it?
Well, that's why we announced a lot of things yesterday. Let me tell you some of the things that we announced that will help people. First of all, the cap on energy bills at £3,000 will save the average house £500. The increase in the state pension by a record 10.1% will increase the average pensioner's income by £870. Then you've got the increase in the national living wage, which we talked about, up to £1,600. Then we're doing one-off payments to people on benefits of £900, one-off payments to pensioners of £300, one-off payments to people with disabilities of £150. And then you've got the reversal of the health and social care levy, which is again another nearly £400. So, you know, put those together, and for the most vulnerable people, there are thousands and thousands of pounds of help that we're offering. But we're doing more than that. We're saying, what is the long-term solution to these cost of living pressures? It's to bring down inflation. And this is a plan that sees inflation fall markedly in the second half of next year. And that, in the end, is going to be the thing that deals with the root cause of people's worries. And that's what we've tried to do today.
Let me just pick out one of the things you mentioned there, and that was honouring the triple lock, seeing pensions rise with inflation. Is it fair, though, that wealthy retirees should enjoy that rise in their income when public sector workers can't?
Well, I think the truth is, first of all, pensioners have retired. They don't have the ability to work more or work longer hours in the way that people of working age do. But I think it's wrong to say that only the poorest pensioners are feeling the squeeze at the moment. I think this is something that's affecting everyone. And I think it's right, having made that promise to pensioners in our manifesto, that we would have this triple lock. I think this is exactly the kind of tough time that people want it to kick in. And so that's why I think it's the right thing to do.
But when a lot of people say you are protecting pensioners, but it's workers that are really being clobbered, aren't they? Given the tax rises that are being imposed on them, does it pay to work under your plans?
Well, we just increased the national living wage to £10.42. That's nearly 10% increase. And that's precisely to make sure we do reward people for working and support people who are on lower pay. So I think we're very aware of those challenges. We're not pretending that this isn't going to be a difficult time for everyone. But what we have is a plan. We're protecting the NHS and schools as we get through a difficult period. And when we get to the other side, you can see inflation coming right down, growth going right up, unemployment coming down, all the things that, you know, they're economic statistics, but they actually affect ordinary families up and down the country. They affect how much we pay for the things we buy. They affect the security of our jobs. And that's why our first responsibility has to be to take the difficult decisions that sort out the root problems the economy is facing.
The tax rises you've announced are astonishing. As a share of GDP, that they're at their highest level since the Second World War. And there are many in your own party that are deeply uncomfortable about that, about putting up taxes when we're in recession. They say it's not very conservative.
Well, the Office for Budget Responsibility say yesterday that what we're doing is actually making the recession shallower. It's saving jobs. But what I would say to my Conservative colleagues is, you know, there is nothing conservative about spending money that you haven't got. There is nothing conservative about not tackling inflation. There's nothing conservative about ducking difficult decisions that put the economy on track. And we've done all of those things. And that's why this is a very conservative package to make sure that we sort out the economy, which is one of the most important things that people expect from us as a party.
But they might say back to you, household incomes falling by 7% in the next 18 months, essentially the run-up to the next general election. Taxation as a share of GDP at its highest level since the war. Unemployment's going to be rising, house prices are going to be rising. Why would you vote Conservative at the next election?
Anna, I'm going to have to make this the last answer, I'm afraid, because I've got to do some other interviews. But let me answer that very directly. People vote Conservative because they know we will take the tough and difficult decisions in the long-term interests of the country. That's what we are doing today. None of this is easy, but it's the right thing to do. And if we're going to bring down the cost of people's shopping bills, make people's jobs more secure, look after the economy, then people know that's what they get with the Conservative Party. At the same time as that, we're making sure that the NHS has the support it needs, our schools have the support they need to get them through a very difficult period. And that's why I think it's a balanced package that everyone will feel able to support. Thank you very much.
OK, Jeremy Hunt, thank you. We'll let you go and do those other interviews. Thanks very much indeed. And he's off. Well, the autumn statement, as you might imagine, does dominate at the front pages of this morning's papers. Hunt paves the way for years of pain. That's the headline on the front of the Financial Times. Carnage reads The Mirror, talking about the millions set to feel the pain of the new measures. From bad to worse, The Guardian's take on the announcements made by the Chancellor. The Telegraph writes that Britain's welfare bill is to rise by almost £90 billion after Jeremy Hunt protects benefit claimants and pensioners from soaring inflation. Also on the autumn statement, the Daily Mail says that middle earners and strivers were hammered with a stealth tax squeeze. And years of tax pain ahead is on the front of the Times. So plenty more about the autumn statement on this show as we continue to digest it. I'll be speaking a little bit later to the economist Richard Davis. With typical energy bills set to rise from April, we'll also get the thoughts of the chairman of the energy company Utilita. And then just after 8 o'clock, I'll be joined by the Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves. So plenty coming up, but first some exclusive research by the Nuffield Trust in partnership with Sky News shows that despite new funding for the NHS, the service is actually worse off. Research reveals nearly all of the additional NHS funding announced by the Chancellor yesterday will be eaten up by inflation. Plus, it faces the growing demands of an ageing population as well. So let's talk through this a little bit more with our data and forensics correspondent, Tom Cheshire. And Tom, interesting actually that Jeremy Hunt, just at the end of the interview there, was talking about this new money he's putting into the health service, despite other budget's going to be squeezed, but this research suggesting that it won't go as far as hoped.
Yeah, because it is a lot of money. It's 3.3 billion each year over the next 2 years out of a total NHS budget of around 152 billion. So there is a lot of money going in, but this research by Nuffield Trust and our analysis shows that it is going to be eaten up very quickly. We can show you what that money is going to be spent on, that additional income. If you look just there, we can see that actually in the first year, there is 0.8 billion of new funding, but the rest of it, that is inflation eating up a huge chunk, 1.7 billion. Growing demand, 0.9 billion. We talk about growing demand, that is a growing population, an ageing population. And then next year, well, there's really no room for improving services. That is all going on rising prices and growing demand. There's a huge amount going on here. And we can look at what inflation specifically is doing to those costs, especially in terms of energy. Look at that, it's gone up a huge amount, £120 million there. And this is only up to March. This is for the year to March. So we haven't had the worst of those price increases. We've spoken to one NHS trust who said they expect it to triple over the next year. So that is only going to get harder, that sort of pressure. So it is not an easy picture. We know there are 7 million people waiting for treatment. The chief executive of the NHS providers said that this is really enough to keep the show, just enough to keep the show on the road, but not enough to improve services. And that's another thing we've seen over the last years. And the last thing we want to look at today, if you think about how much we invest in the long-term capital, one way of looking at that is in terms of the infrastructure of the NHS, the buildings, the hospitals, everything they have. And over the last sort of years, that money hasn't really been spent in the same way. So £4.3 billion actually since 2013 to 2019. That was earmarked for going into improving hospitals, and that hasn't happened. And as a result, we've seen that the cost to repair NHS buildings has just kept rising. £5 billion in 2015. That is now £10.2 billion. And if you look at that red chart, that's also got bigger. That is high risk. That means buildings there could result in catastrophic failure. So there is a lot of money going in. It hasn't been cut by any means, but that's just going to be eaten up straight away. And we're not likely to see that long-term investment, especially in terms of repairing NHS buildings that a lot of hospitals desperately need.
Tom, the figures are staggering, aren't they? Thanks very much indeed. Now, new figures have shown that more than 3,000 children were strip-searched by police in a year, and more than a third were black. According to a Home Office report, there were 65,336 stripped searches carried out by 28 of 43 forces in England and Wales in the year to March. More than 3,000 were carried out on 10 to 17-year-olds, and 19% of adults who were strip-searched were black. That figure climbed to 35% amongst those under 18. In the United States, the House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has announced that she won't run for re-election as leader of the Democrats in the House of Representatives in the new year. She'll step aside after leading the Democrats since 2003, becoming the first woman speaker. At least 21 people, including 10 children, have died in a fire in a building in a densely populated refugee camp in the Gaza Strip. Gaza's Interior Ministry said an initial investigation revealed that large amounts of petrol had been stored at the site, which fuelled the blaze. US Vice President Kamala Harris has convened a meeting of the leaders of Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand and Canada after North Korea tested an intercontinental ballistic missile overnight. Well, joining me now is our Asia correspondent, Helen Ann Smith. So, Helen Ann, tell us a little bit more about this launch by North Korea.
Yeah, well, the Japanese and the South Korean authorities have confirmed they believe that North Korea fired an intercontinental ballistic missile. That's essentially a missile long range enough to theoretically be able to hit targets accurately on the other side of the world, including, for example, in the United States. The Japanese believe that this missile fell into the sea about 130 miles off the coast of Japan. It's just worth saying that this is part of a real barrage, a real ramping up of tensions on the Korean peninsula. There has been at least 33 missiles fired by the North Koreans in the first week of November alone, and this calendar year of 2022 has seen the most missiles launched by North Korea than of any year since the current leader Kim Jong-un came to power. So a real ramping up of tensions. The North Koreans, for their part, they say they are responding to what they see as provocations. President Biden met with the leaders of Japan and the leaders of South Korea on Sunday to discuss their sort of increased cooperation together in response to North Korea. They see that as very, very provocative. And then the Americans and the South Koreans also undertook joint military exercises back at the beginning of November, which was a part of the reason for such big activity by the North Koreans in response then. So there is this real ramping up of tensions. And as you said, Kamala Harris, who is currently in Thailand at the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation meeting with leaders from across the world, she's convened a side meeting with a collection of world leaders to discuss this issue, to discuss the joint response. And she's been commenting publicly about what happened as well today.
We strongly condemn these actions, and we again call for North Korea to stop further unlawful destabilizing acts. On behalf of the United States, I reaffirm our ironclad commitment to our Indo-Pacific alliances. Together, the countries represented here will continue to urge North Korea to commit to serious and sustained diplomacy.
The real concern from the Americans, certainly from the South Koreans and other interested countries in the region, is if and when North Korea moves forward to undertake another full nuclear test. If it does that, it would be the 7th time it's done that, but the last time wasn't since 2017, so really some years ago. And that would be considered as a real test to the very sort of unstable and sort of nerve-wracking truce that currently exists on the Korean peninsula. The South Koreans in particular have made noises about the fact that they would have to be seen to respond if such a test was undertaken. So that is something that many believe the North Koreans are working up to, and certainly many in the region feel very anxious about indeed.
Helen Ann, thanks very much indeed. Well, also making the news this morning, COP27 is winding down today, but the negotiations for a final deal are dragging on. Reparations for countries ravaged by climate change and consequences for those who don't deliver on climate targets are just some of the key issues that negotiators are hoping to pin down on the final day. Egyptian-British activist Alaa Abdel Fattah has broken his hunger strike after he collapsed and needed to be revived. Mr Al Fattah had been on full or partial hunger strike in an Egyptian jail since April and stopped drinking water on the opening day of COP27. He's serving a 5-year sentence for disseminating false news. Royal Mail has announced strikes for Christmas Eve, along with 6 other days next month. The fresh wave of walkouts come in addition to the 4 planned over the next 3 weeks. And around 350 ground handlers at Heathrow Airport have begun a 72-hour strike today in a dispute over pay. Heathrow says no flight cancellations are expected. Now, the Biden administration has told a US court that Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman should be granted immunity in a civil case involving the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Well, let's talk now to our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle. So, Alistair, how significant a move is this?
Very significant, because it effectively brings to an end any hope of Jamal Khashoggi's widow, family and supporters of bringing justice for his murder, and most specifically bringing the man who they believe is responsible for Jamal Khashoggi's murder, or at least for ordering the murder, and that is the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman. It also signifies quite a sort of an about turn of the Biden administration. When President Biden first came into the White House, he took a very cold and principled stance against Saudi Arabia, refusing to deal with the Crown Prince, saying that the Crown Prince was not on his level, leader to leader, head of state to head of state. And then earlier this year in July, the US president decided to go to Saudi Arabia as part of a wider meeting of world leaders. But then he fist bumped Mohammed bin Salman whilst in Saudi Arabia. So it looked as though relations between America and Saudi Arabia were softening. And then a few weeks after that, Saudi Arabia agreed with OPEC to cut the rate of oil production, which the Americans said was effectively siding with the Russians in the war against Ukraine. So at the heart of this, you've got sort of 2 factors. You've got the murder of a Washington Post journalist in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul a number of years ago, and a family trying to seek justice. And then you've got the geopolitics of Saudi Arabia and America, and relations between them at the moment are not fantastic at all. But the White House say that they had no choice, their hands were tied, and that if a head of state is always immune from prosecution. Now, as Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman was not the head of state. But a few days before the White House had to come to its final decision, he was made Prime Minister of Saudi Arabia as well, thereby putting him in the head of state role, thereby giving him immunity. So that is the legalese, if you like. But for the family of Jamal Khashoggi, this is an enormous blow.
OK, Alistair, thanks very much indeed. Now, Catherine, Princess of Wales, has visited a Ukrainian community centre in Reading to meet families displaced by the war. The Princess praised their bravery as they described their experiences and the support that they've received in the UK. Whilst there, Kate was heard comforting Galina, a mother who escaped with her 3-year-old son.
No, it's understandable, considering everything you've all experienced is totally understandable. It's a natural reaction.
Now, Poland's football team have been escorted by fighter jets as they flew out for the Qatar World Cup. The team's official Twitter account posted a video showing 2 F-16 fighter jets flanking the country's official state aircraft until it reached the border with Slovakia. Well, this display came after 2 Polish citizens were killed in a missile strike on Tuesday, which is still currently being investigated. Now, it's been a pretty rocky end to the week for Elon Musk's Twitter after the billionaire gave workers a 24-hour ultimatum to accept new, tougher working conditions. Many have reportedly quit. Well, today the firm announced that offices will be closed for the weekend. Our US correspondent Martha Kellner has all the details.
Twitter seems to be in a state of disarray. There are questions about what the platform will look like in the next 24 to 48 hours, given what is such a massive amount of layoffs in such a short period of time. Just to recap, barely 3 weeks ago, Elon Musk bought Twitter for $44 billion. He tried on numerous occasions to extricate himself from that deal. Twitter took him to court. They forced that deal through, and experts say he vastly overpaid for the company. They say in actual fact it was worth more in the region of $10 to $15 billion. He then laid off 3,500 staff members, and to the remaining half of his workforce he issued an ultimatum over email. He said that they would have to be extremely hardcore and commit to long working hours if they wanted to be part of rebuilding what he called a Twitter 2.0. That deadline has now passed, and it seems that many of those employees, possibly in their hundreds, have chosen to resign from Twitter, taking with them 3 months severance pay, which Musk said he was committed to offering them. So clearly a very, very troubling time at Twitter. And in fact, Elon Musk has taken away the keys to Twitter. He's closed down the offices until Monday, he says. Clearly some fears that there may be people trying to sabotage, perhaps, Twitter. So troubling times for the tech industry as a whole, but Twitter in particular in immediate peril.
Martha Kellner reporting there. Let's take a quick check on the weather now.
Anticipation is rising, and so is the atmosphere. Are you ready? The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, today looks rather cold and windy, with more rain in the north, which may lead to further local flooding. The Met Office has issued warnings of heavy rain in the northeast. An amber warning covers parts of eastern Scotland, where 150 millimetres, 6 inches, is possible on the hills. Hello, you're watching Sky News Breakfast. A reminder of our top stories here this morning. A collapse in living standards, higher taxes and cuts to public spending. The Chancellor is under fire for a budget which spares no one. Exclusive analysis from Sky News and the Nuffield Trust has shown the NHS will actually be worse off after Mr Hunt announced over £3 billion of new funding due to inflation and an ageing population. And there's some good news on the economy. UK retail sales rebounded slightly last month on the back of growth in all areas except food shops. Well, a short while ago, I spoke to the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, and he responded to criticism that his economic plans were against Conservative values.
What we're doing is actually making the recession shallower. It's saving jobs. But what I would say to my Conservative colleagues is, there is nothing Conservative about spending money that you haven't got. There is nothing Conservative about not tackling inflation. There's nothing Conservative about ducking difficult decisions that put the economy on track. And we've done all of those things, and that's why this is a very Conservative package.
Well, our political correspondent, Rob Powell, is here to pick through some of the things that the Chancellor said. And he was responding there to the criticism I put to him from some Tory MPs who are quite upset about this autumn statement. They say it's not very Conservative and it's not typical of the party to put up taxes, especially in the time of recession, they say.
Yeah, this is a tough sell for Jeremy Hunt to numerous audiences. MPs, yes, also the public as well, because what he's got to do is take that pretty bleak forecast, that bleak state of play we had yesterday, and convince people that what he's doing is not making matters worse. And that's what you heard him doing in that clip there, saying that the independent forecasters say it will make the recession shallower. And I think part of the parcel of that as well is saying, look, a lot of this, if not all, most or all of it, is down to global factors. There is something in that. It's not just typical politician blame shifting. A big part of this is interest rates going up on the government's debt. They have been going up around the world. A large part of this is Ukraine as well. It has to be said, though, he's not helped in that mission by what's happened in government in the Tory party in the last few months and the implosion of the Liz Truss project, because that has made it more important than ever that they show responsibility and show restraint in what they are spending. There are real points of tension within this policy package that could cause problems with the public as well. You pointed one out to Jeremy Hunt, which was, how is it fair that on this package anyway, it looks likely that public sector workers won't get a pay rise that goes anywhere near rising prices, and yet pensioners will be getting 10, 11% increase uprated in their packet next year. He said, well, pensioners can't work longer hours and work harder. It doesn't tend to usually go down too well, Tory ministers telling people that if they essentially want to deal with cost of living, they just need to work harder. As far as Tory MPs go, there isn't that much sort of vicious backlash yet. It's rather muted. We had Ian Duncan-Smith on yesterday saying the jury's out. I expect that to grow over the months ahead, though, because Tory MPs know that they've got a general election in probably 2 years' time, and leading into that, they will have rising inflation, they will have living standards going through the floor, mortgages going up. They are, I think, feeling that that is a tough sell on the doorstep, and that is why I think the heat will start to turn up on Jeremy Hunt and Rishi Sunak, if not now, in the months ahead.
Yeah, really interesting to see what the reaction is as the days roll on. Rob, for the moment, thanks very much indeed. So let's get more on this subject and get the view of Richard Davis. He's the director of the UK's Economics Observatory think tank and a former Treasury advisor to former Chancellor George Osborne. He joins us now. Very good morning to you.
Good morning.
So what did you make of it?
I think the first thing to say is that we've gone back to following the proper process. And now that might seem an odd reaction with everything that's going on to be concerned about the process, but it really is important. Back in 2010, the UK put in place this system where we have an independent review of how the country's doing, done by the Office for Budget Responsibility. And that had been ducked by the previous Chancellor. And so what Jeremy Hunt did is he went back to the normal process and asked them, look, how is the economy doing? And actually took their advice, took their forecast. Now, that forecast, and the reason that this is such a big story, is sort of unrelentingly bad. And he then had to react to that. So the first thing we need to say is we've gone back to the process we should have been following, but it's a new reality for the UK, and that reality is zero growth pretty much between 2019 and 2024. So a flatlining economy, essentially.
Well, yes, so back to the normal process, but nothing normal about what's been announced. The Chancellor has said his £55 billion worth of tax rises and deferred spending cuts were necessary to restore the government's fiscal credibility. Do you think he's managed to do that?
I think he has, within the context of this really difficult challenge that he faced. So what's he done that's good? We know that the economy is weakening already. And so he had to make these savings, but he also has a question to answer over the timing of them. And what he's done is he's pushed back as much as possible the spending cuts to the latter half of the Parliament. And actually, in the coming years, in the near term, there's actually some support for schools and hospitals. Now, given the rate of inflation, as you reported just before this segment, actually in real terms, that is in inflation-adjusted terms, it means that even schools and hospitals that are getting this extra money are going to be feeling the pinch. But the important thing is that he's not cutting, which reduces the stimulus to the economy as the economy is weakening. He's trying to get us through the recession, and as the economy starts to strengthen, then put in place the cuts. The flip side of that is taxes. Those will come earlier. And much of that will come through the fact that the economy is going through inflation. So all of us, wherever you are in the income distribution, are going to be nudging up towards higher pay bands. And lots of people will find themselves paying higher rates of tax because of the pay rises that they're receiving.
Well, yes, and on the fact that he's delayed the worst of the spending cuts for another 2 years down the track, you have said that you feel that makes economic sense, but what does that mean politically? The Tories may not be in power in 2 years' time, so these spending cuts that are ever going to happen?
That's a big question, and that's why I opened up by saying I think this is going to go down as a huge fiscal event, and it's a new fiscal reality for the UK. So people are talking about austerity 2.0 and so on. Even with everything that Jeremy Hunt is doing, At the end of this process, Britain does not end up with a large surplus. We've still got a small deficit. So, and that is because of this huge reduction in growth that we've seen. That itself relates on the fact that the country's productivity slowed down about 10 years ago, and we haven't managed to get that back. So what I'm saying is, I don't think in reality anybody, either Hunt's critics from within his own party or from the other side of the aisle, can get past the fact that we face this really difficult situation and we need to get productivity and growth up in our economy.
OK, well, Richard Davis, very interesting to get your take on the autumn statement. Thanks very much indeed for your time.
Thank you.
Now, in his autumn statement, the Chancellor announced that help with energy bills would be extended beyond April next year. However, the typical energy bill is expected to rise from £2,500 to £3,000 a year. So let's get some reaction to that from the chairman of the energy company Utilita, Derek Lickorish. A very good morning to you. Thanks for talking to us. So help is going to be extended, but it's going to be less generous, essentially. What do you make of the Chancellor's move?
Well, there is some good, but there's quite a bit of bad, and there's quite a bit that's ugly. If we look at the good, the fact that the energy price guarantee is going to be extended through to April 24 is good news. The fact that we're going to see cost of living payments continue for those on means tested benefits, which will be about £900 a year, £300 for pensioners, and £150 for the disabled. That's very good. We're going to see the energy bill relief scheme for businesses. That will continue after April 23. He spoke about more renewables, and he spoke about reducing consumption by 15%. So that was all good. But looking at the bad and the ugly, the fact that the energy price guarantee level is going to go up to £3,000 a year, that's going to be bad news for an awful lot of people, because not everyone will get the additional benefits that I've mentioned, because they tend to fall through the cracks. So there needs to be a real push to make sure that people are claiming benefits that they're entitled to, so they can access the other help that is on offer. I was concerned that the reduction in energy of 15% that he seeks by 2030, the funding for that doesn't actually start until 2025. So that's much later, and we should be doing that now. He spoke about that we need more renewable energy. I agree with that. I'm an ardent supporter that we need to get to a low marginal cost system where we do use, we don't have to burn raw energy to make electricity, but we also need massive energy storage. And we don't hear people talking about that enough, because we need to move to this system. It's not just about wind farms and solar farms, it's about energy storage as well. So I'm very concerned for our vulnerable customers, that they will have trouble in meeting for them what is going to be on average another £10 a week. But of course, in the winter, it really bites hard. And £50 worth of energy in the winter will last somewhere between only 3 and 4 days, and you will have got through that £50. So the poorest in society are not going to be looked after in quite the way that I'd hoped if they're not on means-tested benefits.
Well, yes, give us an idea of what the situation is now. How hard are your customers finding it to pay their bills at the moment, and how much worse is that going to get come the spring? I mean, how worried are you about fuel poverty?
Well, we are very anxious about fuel poverty. We're predominantly a prepayment company. We have 800,000 customers on smart prepayment meters. And we know from the volume of calls that we get that customers are struggling. And I remind you, we're not in the eye of this storm yet, because the consumption of gas at the moment is significantly reduced. We see something like about 30 to 40% gas less being used than we would expect. A lot of that is due to the exceptionally mild weather. But when the weather really gets cold, we are very concerned that we will see far more distressed customers coming through to our call centre, unable to charge their meters. And therefore, we will be doing all that we can do to make sure customers are getting the benefits that they are entitled to, and that they can access the additional support that's available. Local authorities did get some additional money to help them, but will it be enough? So I'm very anxious about when cold weather strikes. And as yet, we are living in very mild times in terms of the weather.
And I think I'm right in saying that utility was actually criticised by Ofgem recently, wasn't it, for a lack of support for vulnerable customers. Has that been addressed, and what more can providers like you do to help people?
Well, dealing with that particular thing, we pioneered a scheme called Power Ups. We're able to give customers advance spends, a kind of buy now, pay later. And it was something that we pioneered. And the rest of the industry followed us in various ways of trying to do the same thing. And the issue that Ofgem had with us was that we wouldn't allow customers more additional buy now, pay later spends if they hadn't paid back the others. So we've put all that right.
OK, lovely. I'm sorry to cut you short. We're out of time. Derek Licorice, lovely to talk to you this morning. Thanks very much indeed. Plenty more on the autumn statement next.